Hey everyone, Jamie here from TechnicalCafe.com, and in this tutorial we're going to be talking about how to create a pretty basic random password generator using some HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and also a little bit of the Bootstrap framework. So what we're going to do here is take a quick look at what we have. So this is our random password generator. We're going to have a nav bar up at the top, and then our random password generator interface down here in the middle. So we're going to have a slider here that's going to let us select the desired length of our random password, and we can go from 1 up to 50. And it's going to have a default of 25 when you first arrive on the page. And then once we click this generate button, our random password is going to appear here within this text box. And we can go ahead and add to it if we want. We can remove things, whatever you want to do to edit it. And once you land on a password that you like, you can hit copy to clipboard. We can save this. And then you can go ahead and just paste it into whatever program or website or whatever you want to paste it into. If we want to generate another password, maybe we don't like this one, we can select a new length and we can just hit generate, and we can just keep doing that. And the previously generated passwords appear in this list down here, with the newest one appearing on the bottom. So this is basically our random password generator. Let's jump into our text editor and take a look at what it takes to create this. So we're going to be using Visual Studio Code for this project. We're going to be using 3 separate files. So we're going to say we're going to need an index.html, a styles.css, and a script.js file. And we're also going to need to include the Bootstrap library as well. And we're also going to be using a plugin called Emmet, which is available and actually comes pre-installed with Visual Studio Code, but you can get it for text editors like Atom and I think some others as well. So if you just do a quick Google search for Emmet, you can find it and see if it's compatible with your text editor. And what Emmet actually allows you to do is autocomplete some HTML. So for example, if we wanted to create some HTML boilerplate, we can just type in an exclamation mark, hit tab, and it'll give us this. If we wanted to, for example, create a div, we could just do dot and then use the class name, so we can say test, and it'll give us a div that's all nice and set up with our class. So we're going to be using this just to save some time and make things a little bit easier, and I highly recommend you check it out if you are interested in using that and simplifying your coding flow. So the next thing we're going to do is edit our title, so we're just going to change this from document to random password generator, and I accidentally cut out some of that closing tag. So the next thing we're going to do is add in some of our files that we're going to be using, and the first thing we're going to do is go over to the Bootstrap website. So we're just going to go over to getbootstrap.com. We're going to hit get started, and then we're going to scroll down to where it says CSS, and we're just going to copy a link to the Bootstrap CDN so that we can use this in our file. So let's exit out of there, jump back over to VS Code and paste this in. And the next thing we're going to want to do is include our own styles.css file. So we're going to say link rel equals style sheet, href equals styles.css. And we're going to do the same thing for our JavaScript, so we're going to say script, and we're going to say source equals script.js. All right, so now that we have everything we need to start building our random password generator, let's go ahead and start actually putting the elements on the page. So the first thing we're going to do is create the nav bar that we saw up at the top. It's going to be a Bootstrap nav bar with a dark background and some light text on top of it. So in order to do that, we're going to create a nav, and we're going to give it a class of navbar. We're going to give it another class of navbar_dark, and then we're going to give it a third class of bg-dark to give it that dark background color. Within this, we're going to create a link. So we're going to say a class equals navbar-brand, and this is just going to give us that bold text that is kind of left aligned within the navbar. And we're going to call this, let's just say random password generator, and feel free to call it whatever you want. And we're actually going to set this to point to a hashtag, so it's not going to link out to any other website. So feel free to also set this to whatever you want, but hashtag makes sense here. So let's just save this, jump over to Google Chrome, and take a look, and we have our nice nav bar here. So the next thing we're going to want to start building out is this part of the website here, where we have our essentially our user interface and our buttons and things like that. So let's jump back over to VS Code, and the first thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and create a container. So we're going to just give this div a name of container, our class of container rather. And within this, we're going to be using the Bootstrap grid to kind of align things and basically set up our layout. And if you're not familiar with the Bootstrap grid, it basically allows you to create as many rows as you'd like, and within those rows you can have you can have up to 12 columns to align your content on your page. So you can have, for example, a column that's 6 sections wide, and then have another column that's 6 sections wide. You can have one that's 8, and then another one that's 4. You have basically 12 sections of viewport to work with the Bootstrap grid system. So within this, we're just going to go ahead and create a row. And within this row, we're going to go ahead and create a column. So this column's going to have 2 different sizes associated with it. So we're going to have a size of column-LG-8. So on large screens, we're going to have an 8 column, or essentially an 8 width wide column. And then on smaller screens, we're going to have column-SM-12, which will make it take up the whole screen, or all 12 columns of the screen. So let's go ahead and create that. And within this, what we're going to do is create another div for our content. So we're just going to call it content. And then we're going to go ahead and start entering our text. So the first thing we're going to do is create our header. And this is going to be using an h4 tag. So we're just going to say random password generator. And then we're going to use a line break to do some separation. And we're going to add our text box. So input type equals text. And we're going to give this text box an ID of display. So this is where we're going to be displaying our randomly generated passwords. Going to use another line break, and under this we're going to add our slider, or our range of the password lengths that we want. So we're going to say input type equals range. We're going to give it a minimum number, or a minimum value of 0, and we're going to give it a maximum value of 50, and we're going to give it a name of slider and an ID also of slider. And you might notice that we gave it a minimum of 0, but in reality the minimum is 1, and you'll see why this is a little bit later on in the tutorial. So now that we have this, what we're going to do is add our buttons. So we're going to add in yet another line break, and then we're going to go ahead and create a button. We're going to set the on-click value to blank right now until we start writing our JavaScript, but we're going to go ahead and have our button say generate, and then we're going to create another button, again with the on-click of blank for right now. And we're going to say copy to clipboard. And then under these buttons, we're going to also create a spot for our length here. So the length is going to appear to the right of these 2 buttons. Okay, so let's jump back over to Visual Studio Code. And we're going to go ahead and create a div, and we're going to give it an ID of length. And we're going to leave nothing in there because we're going to populate it using JavaScript. So we're not going to see this div on the page for the moment being. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and create the area where we're going to store our previously generated passwords. So that's down here, and it's outside of this div. So what we're going to do is jump out of here, and we're going to go ahead and give this a class, this div a class of previous underscore passwords. And within this div, we're just going to give add a bold headline here to say previously generated passwords. Then we're going to add a line break here, and then we're going to go ahead and just create another div in here, and we're going to give it an ID of last nums. And I probably should have called this last passwords, but we can change that later. So let's save, let's jump over to Google Chrome, and let's take a look at what we have. So this is what we have right now. It doesn't look quite as nice as this, but let's go ahead and start styling it using a bit of CSS. So if we jump over here to styles.css, what we're going to do is start adding in our styles to make things look nicer. So we're going to start with the content div that we created. So we're going to say .content. What we're going to do is give it a top margin of 10 pixels and a bottom margin of 10 pixels. So we'll just say margin top of 10 pixels, margin bottom of 10 pixels, and we're going to give it a background color of light gray. And the cool thing I think about Visual Studio Code is that it gives you this nice preview of the color. So for example, if we chose blue, it would give us the little square of blue color, but we're going to go with light gray. Feel free to use whatever color you like. We're then going to add in some padding of 20 pixels on all sides, and we're going to add in a width of 100%. So what this is going to do is basically stretch the content div to be the size of its parent, which should take up the full 8 columns or 8 viewport basically slices on a large screen and all 12 on a smaller screen. So if we save this, jump over to Chrome again and refresh, you notice that now we have this nice background color here, but we don't have a text box that stretches across the screen, and this slider also doesn't stretch across the screen. So we're going to go ahead and assign these some styles as well. So we're going to start with the display or the text box, and we're going to go ahead and say display, and we're going to give that a width of 100%, so it'll take up the same amount of space as the div itself. And we're going to do the same thing for our slider. So we're going to say slider, and we're going to give it a width of 100%. So let's jump over here to Google Chrome and refresh, and now things look just a little bit nicer. However, you'll notice that this whole password generator interface essentially is aligned a little bit more to the left than it is to the right, whereas here it's centered. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is actually jump back into our index.html file, and what we're going to do is apply a Bootstrap class to our columns here. So we're going to say mx.auto, which is going to apply auto margins to these columns here, and it's going to center the div for us. So if we save this, jump back over to Chrome and refresh, you notice that now we have everything centered, and it looks very similar to what we had in the original version here. So now that we have the styles written, let's go ahead and start writing the JavaScript code that's going to allow us to generate our passwords, copy them to the clipboard, and show length when we move our slider here. So over to our scripts.js page we're going to go, and we're going to start writing our JavaScript. So we're going to call the generation function to generate the passwords. Let's just say generate random password. And we're going to say function, and we're going to give it a name of generate. Feel free to call it whatever you want, just think it makes sense since it's generating a password to be called generate. So what we're going to do is start off by setting the complexity of the password or the length of the password to be whatever the user chooses using the slider or the range element. So let's just say set password length / complexity. And we're going to say let complexity equal document.get element by ID, and we're going to reference our slider element that we gave an ID of slider, and we're just going to grab the value of that. So let's go ahead next and create a variable that's going to hold all of the possible values we can use to generate our password. So we could do this a couple of ways. We could maybe use an array, but we're just going to set a string to and assign it to a variable. So we're going to say let values equal, and basically what we're going to do is just include all uppercase letters, all lowercase letters, all of the numbers, and we're going to include some symbols as well. But you can actually feel free to include only the letters and numbers and symbols that you'd like to use. So we're going to go ahead, and I'm just going to copy and paste this to make it easy. We're going to copy and paste, like I said, all letters, numbers, symbols, and it should look just like that. So let's just say, add a comment here and say possible password values. And then we're going to go down here and create another variable. So we're going to say let password equal blank, because this is going to be the variable that gets set when a user hits the generate button. And we could probably actually create a constant here instead of assigning it as just a variable that can be updated, but we'll leave that alone for now. So the next thing I'm going to do is create a for loop that's going to iterate the number of times equal to the complexity of the password. So if the password is, say, 5 characters long, it's going to go through 5 times and pick something from this values list and add it to the password. So let's go ahead and say create for loop to choose password characters. So we're going to say for, and we're going to say var I equals 0, because we're going to start at 0. I is less than or equal to complexity. And we're going to say I++. And then within our loop here, we're going to say password equals password So we're going to say basically add on to the password. So this password here is going to be equal to whatever it already is, and then we're going to add on values.char@, and this is going to set the character, pick a character from here and add it to our password. So values.char@ math.floor, and then we're going to say math.random times math.floor values.length -1. So this might seem a little bit complicated, but pretty much what we're doing is setting it equal to setting the password equal to however many, whatever the complexity is that the user set. So now what we're going to do, and basically we're saying that we can choose anything within this values variable, and we're going to take the length of it. We're basically going to subtract 1 from it because the length starts at 0, and we're going to get any number within here randomly. So it might sound a little bit confusing, and I might not have explained it too perfectly, but this code works. It grabs a random value from here and adds it to our password. So following that, what we're going to do is then add this password to our text box, and we're going to do that by saying, let's just create a comment, add password to text box / display area. And what we're going to do is say document.get element by ID, and we're just going to grab the ID of the text box, which we call display, and we're going to say .value. So we're going to set the value of whatever's inside of that text box to password. So if we go ahead and save our JavaScript file here, what we're going to do is jump back over to our index.html file, and we're going to actually include this generate function as the on-click value for the generate button. So we're just going to say generate, and then when we save this and jump back over to Google Chrome, we should see that the password appears in this text box when we hit generate. And actually that is not the case. So if we jump over here, we can take a look at our JavaScript code and take a look at if we spelled anything wrong or anything like that. And I believe here is the issue because we said value instead of values. So if we add the S, we can go ahead and save this. And now everything should work when we jump back to Google Chrome and hit generate. So now we get a password of the desired length once we hit generate. So everything is working there, but it's not appearing down here in the previously generated password section, and we're not getting our length. So let's go ahead and continue to write our JavaScript. And actually, the copy to clipboard function doesn't work either, so we're going to have to write that code as well. So if we jump back over to Visual Studio Code, the next thing we're going to want to do is write the code to add the password to our previously generated passwords section. So in order to do that, we're just going to add this to our generate function, and we're going to say, create a comment to say add password to previously generated passwords section. And that's pretty simple. All we have to do is say document.get element by ID, and we're just going to grab the last nums div, and we're going to say .inner HTML plus equals password. And then we're also going to concatenate on a line break to add some spacing here. So basically what this does is it grabs the last nums div that we created, and it sets the HTML code within it to whatever the value of password is, and then it's just going to add a line break so that we have some space between the passwords and they don't all appear on the same line. So quickly, let's save this, back over to Google Chrome, refresh, and generate a password, and you'll notice that our password appears down here within our previously generated password section. One thing that we're going to want to do though is add some spacing down here so that this password isn't right up against the bottom of our browser. So in order to do that, we're going to jump back over to Visual Studio Code. We're going to jump into styles.css, and then what we're going to do is go ahead and write some CSS real quick that's going to add some margin to the bottom of our div there. So we're going to go ahead and say .previous _ passwords, and we're just going to give it some margin bottom of 20 pixels, and that should make things look a little bit nicer. So when we refresh, let's generate a bunch of passwords here. And now you notice that we get a little bit of spacing here, just so that this isn't, hard to read and right up against the bottom of the browser. So the next thing we're going to want to do now is go ahead and add in the length here. For when we slide our slider, you can see what your password length is going to be. So that's pretty easy to do. We're just going to go over here to Visual Studio Code, and then we're going to head on over back to script.js, and then we're going to jump outside of our generate function, and we're going to create a default length display, because when you first load the page, the length display shows the value of 25, which is halfway between 1 and 50. So in order to do that, we're just going to say, we're going to leave a comment first saying set default length display of 25, and then we're going to say document.getElementById, and we're going to select our length div, and then what we're going to do is set the inner HTML to be equal to length 25. So now what we need to do is just save this, that everything is showing up okay. So let's just jump back over to Google Chrome. If we jump back over to our generator, we can refresh, and we're noticing that there is no default length, and I think the reason for that is because we actually included the JavaScript up here in the top of the file in our header, and what we want to do is actually move this down here just before the end of the body section of our code, save this, jump back over to Google Chrome, and refresh, and you'll notice that now we have our length appearing in our random password generator. And the reason for this is because the JavaScript is trying to execute before everything is loaded, and that is going to cause us some issues. So the next thing we're going to want to do is move this length value over here beside the copy to clipboard button. So in order to do that, we're going to add some CSS. We're going to jump back over to Visual Studio Code. We're going to jump back into our styles.css file. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and under the slider here, we're just going to add some code to display our length a little bit differently. So we're going to display this as an inline block element. And then what we're going to do is just give it a width of 100 pixels. So now if we go over to Google Chrome and refresh again, our length appears here, right next to our copy to clipboard button like we want. It doesn't do anything because the JavaScript code we wrote is just keeping it at a stationary 25. So now what we need to do is go in and add some code that captures the value of this range slider and adds it in as we slide. So pretty simple to do. Let's jump back over to Visual Studio Code. We're going to head over to our scripts.js file, and underneath this, what we're going to do is create a function. So let's just say function to set length based on slider position. And let's just spell length right, so L-E-N-G-T-H. So our function is going to look a little bit different than what we have up here. We're not going to write just the function itself. What we're going to do is say document.getElementById, and in this case we're going to select our slider. And what we're going to do is say on input, so whenever somebody grabs the slider and starts dragging it, therefore providing input to it, what we're going to do is call a function. And this function is going to look like this. So what we're going to do is say if document.getElementById, getElementById, and we're going to select the slider. If its value is greater than 0, what we're going to do is we're going to set document.getElementById. But we're going to set the length div, its inner HTML, to be equal to length. Put a colon in there. And then what we're going to do is concatenate on the value of the slider at the current point that the user has it. So document.getElementById. And then we're going to say slider.value. And one thing that you could do actually to simplify this would be to set the slider's value equal to a variable. So we could maybe say let document.getElementById slider.value, maybe set it equal to a variable called slider value or something like that. Just saves on the amount of code that you have to type and makes things look a little bit neater. So feel free to do that in your version of the code. I apologize I didn't do it for you in the version that I wrote. So the next thing I'm going to do is write an else statement. Basically what we're going to do here is if the slider is equal to 0, we're just going to have it display a length of 1. So we're going to say document.getElementById. We're going to select our length div. And we're just going to set it, the inner HTML there, to be equal to length of 1. All right, so now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and save this, jump over to Google Chrome, refresh, and let's drag our slider. As you'll notice here, it seems to work just fine. We have a length of 1, length of 50. We can generate a 50-character password, can generate a 1-character password, and the default is right in the middle at 25. So everything seems to be working fine here, except the copy to clipboard function. So we're going to go ahead and add that as well. It's a pretty easy function to write. So if we jump back into VS Code, what we're going to do is add our copy to clipboard function. So in order to do that, we're just going to say function to copy password to clipboard. Okay, there we go, spelled it right. So we're going to say function, and we're just going to call it copy password. Feel free to call it whatever you want. Oops. Make sure you make your function right. So within our function here, what we're going to do is say document.getElement by ID. What we're going to do is select the display. So our text box at the top of our password generator, we're going to select that using JavaScript. And it just auto-completed incorrectly, so we'll say .select. And then what we're going to do is use the document.exec command function, or execute command function, and we're just going to execute the copy function. And then, because the password will be copied, we want the user to know that it's copied. So in order to do that, we're just going to throw up an alert. So we're just going to say alert, and we're going to say password copied to clipboard. And feel free to say whatever you want. Some people might want to concatenate on the value of the password here, but it's up to you. So now all we got to do is save this, and we have to jump back over to our index.html file, and we have to add this function to the on-click value of our copy to clipboard button. So we're just going to say copy password, save this, jump back into Google Chrome, give it a refresh, generate a password, copy to clipboard, password copy to clipboard. Let's go ahead and try to paste it up here in our URL bar. And it looks like our password was copied correctly. Let's generate a little bit shorter of a password, copy it to the clipboard, paste it in correctly, and just third time's the charm. Generate a long password, jump over here, and paste it, and it looks like everything is working just fine. So this is our random password generator. Feel free to play around with some of the functions, make things a little bit different. The JavaScript for this could probably be simplified quite a bit. We could add in some variables, and we could clean things up quite a bit, I think. But this was just a quick tutorial on how to make a random password generator. Feel free to add any features that you want. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, or if you added any features, or what you did with this. I'd be interested to see it. And let me know if you have any suggestions for future tutorials. So I thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.